The cold of the Chicago winter didn't just seep through the thin walls of my studio apartment. It lived there. It was a permanent resident, as much as I was. I sat on the edge of my worn-out mattress, the only piece of furniture besides a rickety table, and stared at the number on my phone screen. My bank balance, $317. A hollow laugh escaped my lips, a dry, brittle sound in the silent room. $3.17. And rent was due in 4 days. My name is Leo, and I was the family ghost, the one my successful older brothers mentioned in hushed, pitying tones at Thanksgiving. "How's Leo?" "Oh, still trying to find his way." I wasn't just broke, I was a professional disappointment. My oldest brother, Marcus, was a hedge fund manager in New York. He wore suits that cost more than my entire year's rent. My other brother, David, was a hotshot lawyer in L.A. They had families, mortgages, futures. They had substance. I had a stack of rejected manuscript pages and a mountain of debt from a liberal arts degree everyone told me was useless. I was a writer with nothing to say that anyone wanted to hear. My phone buzzed, shattering the silence. It was a group text from Marcus. A picture flashed up, him, David, and their families, all wearing matching ugly Christmas sweaters, standing in front of a towering, perfectly decorated tree. The caption read, "Miller, Family, Christmas Eve. Wish you were here, Leo." The lie was so blatant it was almost impressive. They hadn't invited me. I couldn't have afforded the plane ticket anyway. I put the phone face down, the cheerful image burning against the cheap wood of the table. This was my life, a spectator to someone else's perfect story. But then a memory surfaced, sharp and clear amidst the fog of my self-pity. It was from 6 months ago. I'd been even more desperate then, facing eviction. Swallowing a gallon of pride, I'd called Marcus. "Marcus, hey, it's Leo." "Little brother, to what do I owe the pleasure?" His voice was all polished charm. I'm in a bit of a bind. I need to come up with $800 for rent by Friday. I was wondering if I could borrow it. I'll pay you back as soon as—" "Leo, he'd sighed, the charm evaporating. "You're 30 years old. When are you going to get your act together? I'm not an ATM. You need to learn financial responsibility. This is a you problem." He'd hung up. I'd sat on the same mattress, feeling the heat of shame crawl up my neck. Then I'd called David. The conversation was almost identical, ending with a patronizing, "Maybe it's time to consider a trade, Leo. Writing isn't a real job." Terrified and out of options, I'd done the one thing I never wanted to do. I'd called my younger brother, Ben. Ben was different. 4 years younger than me, he was a mechanic. He worked with his hands, his life as unpolished and honest as his work-roughened palms. We weren't close. The age gap and life choices had seen to that, but there was no judgment in his eyes. "Leo, everything okay?" he'd answered, his voice laced with immediate concern. "Not really, man," I'd admitted, the truth tumbling out. "I'm behind on rent. I just need $800. I'll pay you back, I swear." There was no sigh, no lecture, just a pause. "Okay," he said, "give me your Zelle info. I'm sending it now." And he did. No questions asked, no contract, just faith. A week later, a package arrived. It was a heavy winter coat, a good one. The note inside was in Ben's messy scrawl. "Saw the forecast. Chicago's no joke. Stay warm, man. Don't worry about the money." I'd cried then. In this cold, empty room, that coat and that act of unconditional kindness were the only things that felt real. Now, sitting here with my 317, that memory was a lifeline. It was also a stark reminder of the chasm between my brothers. Marcus and David saw me as a problem. Ben saw me as a person. I needed to get out. I needed a coffee, something to shock my system out of this despair. I pulled on the coat Ben had sent me, the warmth of it a small defiance against the cold, and trudged down to the corner bodega. As I waited in line, my last few crumpled dollars in hand, I saw the lottery terminal. The Mega Millions jackpot was $60 million. A stupid, fleeting thought. A fantasy for desperate people. On a whim, a final act of hopeless rebellion against my circumstances, I used one of my precious dollars. I picked the numbers at random, a combination of our birthdays, a bitter little joke on a family that had forgotten me. I stuffed the ticket into the pocket of the coat, right next to my heart, and forgot about it. The next few days were a blur of job applications and silent panic. It wasn't until I was back at the bodega 3 days later, buying a single sad banana with my last dollar, that I saw the headline on a discarded newspaper. 60 million winning ticket sold in Chicago. My breath hitched. A crazy, impossible hope. I fumbled in my coat pocket, my fingers closing around the flimsy piece of paper. With trembling hands, I pulled out my dead phone, charged it just enough at the library, and compared the numbers on the screen to the numbers on my ticket. They matched. All of them. I sat down on the cold library steps, the world tilting on its axis. The sounds of the city, the honking cars, the chatter of people, faded into a dull, distant roar. $60 million. The number was so vast it was abstract. It was a different universe. It was an escape pod from a life of being the invisible, disappointing brother. My first primal instinct was to call someone, to scream it from the rooftops. But who? Marcus? So he could tell me to invest it wisely? David? So he could offer to manage it for a fee? No. A profound, powerful calm settled over me. This was my secret. My power. I claimed the prize anonymously through a legal trust, a process that took weeks and was more stressful than any job interview. But when it was done, the money was mine. All of it. I didn't quit my apartment. I didn't buy a car. I didn't change a thing. I became a ghost with a nuclear weapon. I watched Marcus and David continue their perfect lives on social media, completely unaware that the brother they pitied could buy and sell them 100 times over. But the money felt hollow. It was just a number in an account. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. Revenge, I realized, needed a purpose. It needed a target. And I knew exactly who deserved to share in this secret. Not the brothers who had everything, but the one brother who had helped me when I had nothing. I booked a one-way ticket to Ben's small, unassuming town. It was time for the invisible man to be seen, but only by the one person who had always seen him. Ben's world smelled of motor oil, gasoline, and honest sweat. Ben's auto repair was a modest, two-bay garage on the edge of a small town where everyone knew everyone. I stood across the street for a moment, watching him through the open bay door. He was hunched over an engine, his back muscles straining under a grease-stained t-shirt, wholly focused on the problem in front of him. He looked content. This was the polar opposite of Marcus's sterile skyscraper or David's manicured law office. This was real. I took a deep breath and walked across the street. The bell on the door jingled as I entered. Ben looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. It took him a second, his mind still deep in the engine's puzzle. Then recognition dawned, followed by a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Leo? No way! What are you doing here?" He came over and pulled me into a brief, strong hug, the smell of engine grease and hard work a comforting familiarity. "Just needed a change of scenery," I said, the lie feeling flimsy. "Thought I'd visit my little brother." "Well, hell, I'm glad you did," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're just in time. I'm about to order a pizza. You can help me wrestle this transmission." For the next few hours, I did just that. I handed him tools, held flashlights, and listened as he talked about his life. His girlfriend, Maria. His dream of buying the building instead of renting it. The simple, uncomplicated satisfaction of a day's work. He didn't ask me about my writing or my failures. He just let me be there. It was the most normal I'd felt in years. Later, we sat on overturned milk crates in the back of the garage eating greasy pizza straight from the box. "So, seriously, Leo, everything okay?" Ben asked, his tone gentle. "You seem different." I looked at him, at his honest face, his kind eyes. This was the man who had sent me his hard-earned money without a second thought, the man who had bought me a coat to keep me warm. The secret of the $60 million felt like a physical weight in my chest. It was too big to carry alone, and he was the only one I trusted to help me carry it. "Ben," I started, my voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something, and you have to promise me you won't say a word to anyone. Not to Maria, not to Mom, no one." His smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Of course, you know that. What's going on?" I reached into the pocket of the coat he'd given me, the same coat I'd worn here, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't the lottery ticket. That was in a safety deposit box. It was a copy of the bank statement for the trust. I handed it to him. He wiped his hands meticulously on his rag again, then took it. He unfolded it, his brow furrowed in confusion. His eyes scanned the page, down to the bottom line. He froze. The color drained from his face. He looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper, as if the numbers were a language he couldn't decipher. This is a joke, right?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Leo, what is this?" "It's not a joke," I said, my own voice steady. "I won the lottery, $60 million. After taxes, that's what's left." He dropped the paper as if it had burned him. It fluttered to the oily concrete floor. He stood up, pacing the small cluttered space, running a hand through his hair. No way. This doesn't happen. Not to people like us." He stopped and stared at me, his eyes wide with something akin to fear. "Does Marcus know? David?" "No," I said firmly, "and they never will. You're the only one in the entire world who knows." The implication of that settled over him. The absolute, staggering trust I was placing in him. He was the keeper of the secret. "Why?" he finally asked, sinking back onto the milk crate. "Why me?" "Because when I had nothing," I said, the memory of that desperate phone call sharp in my mind, "you gave me everything you could. You saw me drowning, and you threw me a lifeline without a second thought. They told me I was a problem." Tears welled in Ben's eyes. He wasn't looking at the money anymore. He was looking at me. He understood. This wasn't about the lottery. This was about everything that had come before it. "So," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "I was thinking, you want to buy this building?" He let out a choked laugh. "Yeah, right. The owner wants way too much for it." "Not for us, he doesn't," I said. "Consider it bought. It's yours, free and clear." He stared at me, speechless. "And that's just the start, Ben," I continued. The plan I'd been forming finally taking shape. "I don't want to just be rich. I want to do something real, with you." "Like what?" he breathed. "Like this," I said, gesturing around the garage, "but more, a state-of-the-art auto shop, one that treats its mechanics like gold, that offers apprenticeships for kids who don't want to go to college. A real, honest business that we build together. You run it. You're the brains, the talent. I'll be the silent partner." The shock on his face was slowly being replaced by a dawning, incredible hope. This was his dream, amplified 1,000 times. Not handed to him, but offered as a partnership. "This is crazy," he whispered, but a huge, disbelieving grin was breaking through. Leo, this is insane." "I know," I laughed, the sound feeling foreign and wonderful. "So, what do you say? You want to build something with me?" He didn't answer with words. He just stood up and pulled me into another, much tighter hug. This one was different. It was a pact. In that grimy, oil-stained garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade, we forged a new alliance. The invisible brother and the one who had always seen him. Together, we were about to build a fortress of our own making, with a $60 million foundation. And the rest of the world, especially our successful older brothers, would never know a thing. The following months were a whirlwind of silent, exhilarating creation. While Marcus posted about his new yacht club membership and David bragged about his corner office renovation, Ben and I were building our empire in plain sight, disguised as a simple expansion. We didn't just buy the garage, we bought the entire block. Using a labyrinth of LLCs and a very discreet lawyer, we became the anonymous owners. To the town, it was just a lucky break for Ben, who had found a silent investor. But this was no ordinary investor. This was revenge, distilled into concrete and steel. We broke ground on the new Miller & Sons Automotive Complex. The name was my idea, a quiet, inside joke that filled me with a fierce sense of satisfaction. There were no sons of Marcus or David here. This was for Ben and me. The complex was a mechanic's paradise. We installed hydraulic lifts that were the envy of dealerships, a climate-controlled detailing bay, a parts department that could rival a national chain, and a comfortable modern waiting area with free premium coffee and Wi-Fi. We hired 2 more master mechanics, paying them top-tier wages with full benefits, a rarity in the industry. Ben was in his element. The stress of scraping by vanished, replaced by the vibrant energy of a man building his legacy. He was a born leader, his respect for the work and the people who did it inspiring fierce loyalty. I handled the books and the grand strategy from a sleek new office above the garage, but the soul of the place was all Ben. We also launched the Miller & Sons Apprenticeship Program, offering paid training to local high school graduates. It was the heart of our mission, to give kids like Ben, and like the man I used to be, a chance at a dignified, prosperous life without a college degree. We were happy, truly, deeply happy. The money hadn't changed us, it had unlocked us. Meanwhile, the facade of our older brothers' lives began to show hairline cracks. Marcus A.S. hedge fund was involved in a minor scandal that wasn't so minor on social media. David lost a very public, messy court case. Their perfect Instagram lives now had comment sections filled with schadenfreude. They never called me, but they started calling Ben. "Hey, little brother," Marcus's voice would boom through Ben's speakerphone, the false warmth barely concealing his stress. "Just checking in. Heard you're doing well with the shop. Maybe I should send my Aston Martin your way for a tune-up." David's calls were more direct. "Ben, if you're ever looking to incorporate or need legal shelter, you know I'm the man. Family discount, of course." Ben would just smile, give vague, polite answers, and change the subject. We had a pact. They lived in their world. We were building ours. A year after the lottery win, our automotive complex was the talk of the region. We were profitable, growing, and a pillar of the community. Ben and Maria got engaged. Life was so full, I barely thought about the $60 million anymore. It was just the seed capital for a life that was now rich in ways money couldn't measure. Then the storm hit. It was a call from our mother. Her voice was frantic, choked with tears. "It's your father," she cried. "He's had a massive heart attack. They don't know if he'll make it. You all need to come home. Now." The world screeched to a halt. The rivalries, the silent revenge, the money, it all vaporized in the face of this. He was our dad. Ben and I dropped everything. I transferred a massive amount to our joint account for whatever expenses might arise, and we drove through the night to our childhood home in Ohio. The house was full of the stifling silence of dread. Marcus and David were already there, looking pale and shell-shocked in their expensive casual wear. For a moment, we weren't the successful brother, the lawyer, the writer, and the mechanic. We were just 4 scared boys. The doctors were grim. Dad needed a specialized experimental surgery. It wasn't covered by insurance. The cost was astronomical, $750,000. The 4 of us stood in the harsh, fluorescent-lit hospital waiting room. "I can cover $200,000. Marcus said, his voice uncharacteristically small. "But it'll liquidate my son's college fund." "I can do $150," David added, rubbing his temples. "I'll have to take a second mortgage." They both looked at me and Ben. The familiar, unspoken hierarchy settled back into place. Marcus sighed. Leo, Ben, we know you can't contribute financially, but if you could handle things here with Mom, that would be a huge help. The old narrative was back. They were the providers. We were the support staff. Ben and I exchanged a look. A silent conversation passed between us in a split second. The pact was over. This was more important. Don't worry about the money, I said, my voice quiet but clear. Marcus gave a sad, patronizing smile. Leo, that's sweet, but this is reality. We're talking about $750,000. I said, don't worry about it, I repeated, my tone leaving no room for argument. I pulled out my phone, a simple, unassuming smartphone, but it was the key to a kingdom they knew nothing about. I opened the banking app for the trust, navigated to the wire transfer page, and entered the hospital's details. I showed the screen to Ben. He nodded once. I entered the amount, 750,000 yen. I pressed send. A confirmation screen appeared instantly. Transfer of 750,000 Hwars to University Hospital completed. I held the phone out to Marcus. It's done. He took the phone, his brow furrowed in confusion. David peered over his shoulder. They stared at the screen. The color drained from their faces, just as it had from Ben's in the garage a year ago. Their jaws went slack. They saw the balance. The number that remained after the $750,000 payment was still so vast it was incomprehensible. Marcus's hand trembled. He looked from the phone to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of utter confusion, shock, and a dawning, horrifying understanding. How? Leo, David stammered, his lawyerly composure completely shattered. What is this? Ben stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder, a united front. He won the lottery, Ben said, his voice steady and strong. Over a year ago, $60 million. He paid for my shop. He paid for everything. And he just paid for Dad. The silence in the waiting room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Marcus and David just stared at us. Two kings who had just discovered that the paupers they had ignored were actually the true rulers of the land. The invisible man was finally visible, and the view was devastating. The surgery was a success. Our father would live. The tension in the hospital waiting room, however, had merely shifted from dread to a profound seismic shock. Marcus and David couldn't look at me. They sat in stunned silence, staring at their hands or the ugly patterned floor. The foundation of their entire world, the hierarchy they had built and enforced their entire lives, had been vaporized in an instant. The brother they had pitied, lectured, and excluded was not just their equal. He was their superior in the only language they truly understood: net worth. And he had been, for over a year, right under their noses. I felt no triumph. Watching them grapple with it was like watching someone realize the sky wasn't blue, but a color they had no name for. It was a fundamental rewriting of their reality. After Dad was stabilized and resting, we all went back to our parents' house. The air in the living room was thick enough to chew. Our mother, eternally oblivious to the undercurrents, was just ecstatic that Dad was okay. I still can't believe it, she kept saying, dabbing her eyes. $750,000. Leo, you saved your father's life. Where on earth did you get that kind of money? Marcus and David flinched. I got lucky, Mom, I said softly, catching Ben's eye. He gave me a small supportive nod. It's a long story. The important thing is that Dad's okay. Later that night, I found Marcus alone on the back porch, staring into the dark. He had a glass of our father's whiskey in his hand, but he wasn't drinking it. You must think this is hilarious, he said without turning around, his voice flat. The mighty, brought low by the family failure. I leaned against the railing next to him. I never thought you were low, Marcus, and I was never a failure. You just needed to believe I was to feel better about yourself. He finally looked at me, and in the dim light, I saw the boy I'd looked up to as a child, now buried under layers of ambition and insecurity. Why didn't you tell us? What would you have done if I had? I asked. Given me investment advice? Told me to be responsible? Or asked for a loan to cover a bad quarter? He had no answer. He knew it was true. The money. It's not what you think, I said. It didn't fix me. It just gave me a megaphone. Ben was the one who fixed me. He saw me when I was broken and didn't look away. You and David. You just saw a reflection of your own fears. I left him there with his thoughts and his untouched whiskey. The next morning, David cornered me in the kitchen. The lawyer was back, but he was negotiating from a position of profound weakness. Leo, that money, it needs to be managed properly. You can't just keep it sitting in accounts, the tax implications alone. It's being managed, David, I interrupted gently. By me, and by a team of the best financial advisors money can buy. The same ones you and Marcus probably use. The wind went out of his sails. He'd wanted to be needed, to be the expert. But I didn't need a lawyer or a hedge fund manager. I had become my own. We stayed for a week until Dad was out of the woods and home. The dynamic was forever changed. There were no more patronizing comments, no more veiled jokes about my career. The $60 million secret was a wall between us, and they were on the wrong side of it. Ben and I drove back to our town, to our auto complex, to our real lives. The silence in the car was comfortable, full of understanding. You okay? Ben asked after a while. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I am. A month later, a letter arrived at my office. It was from Marcus, handwritten. Leo, I've spent the last few weeks doing a lot of thinking. You were right. About everything. I was a terrible brother. I measured worth by a spreadsheet and forgot about the heart. What you did for Dad, and what you've done for Ben. It's humbling. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I'm proud of the man you are, Marcus. It wasn't a full reconciliation. The scars were too deep, but it was a start, a crack in the armor. David never wrote, but he stopped offering unsolicited advice. It was the best I could hope for. The true revenge wasn't in their humiliation. It was in my liberation. I was free from their judgment, free from the need for their approval. The $60 million had given me choices, but it was Ben's loyalty that had given me a direction. Together, we had built something that mattered. Our auto complex was thriving. Our apprenticeship program was changing lives, and we were happy. One evening, Ben and I were back in the garage sitting on our familiar milk crates, celebrating our second-year anniversary in business. The place was quiet, the tools put away for the night. You know, Ben said, taking a sip of his beer, I was thinking about the name, Miller & Sons. It's not really accurate anymore. What do you mean? Well, he said, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Maria's pregnant. We're having a son. So soon it will be accurate. I stared at him, the news washing over me in a wave of pure, unadulterated joy. I pulled him into a hug, laughing. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of oil and success, with the promise of a new generation, I realized the true value of the $60 million. It wasn't the number in the bank. It was the coat bought with a brother's love. It was the partnership forged in trust. It was the life-saving surgery for a father. It was the future for a nephew who would never know the struggle his father and uncle had endured. The money was just paper. The fortune was the family I had chosen, the life I had built, and the silent, powerful revenge of a happiness they could never take away. The greatest wealth isn't measured in millions, but in the moments that make us rich in spirit. And the most satisfying revenge is not in flaunting your success, but in living a life so full of purpose and love that the people who doubted you become mere footnotes in your story. This has been Silent Revenge.